Another day, another drama. Hello, friends, and welcome back to Sorry What. We have a two-part story today, and as usual, part 2 will be uploaded tomorrow. Before we start today's story, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet and send some love by liking the video. Now then, let us begin. 20 hours from Singapore to O'Hare International with a stop in Taipei, flying business class, which was only marginally better than the cattle car called economy, and on my birthday hardly fazed me. Heading back to Chicago for what was looking to be a brutal meeting with the head of our international stock and share trading department didn't faze me much either. Trying to anticipate what was going on at home did. We landed a little after 8:30 in the morning, and I caught the shuttle to the nearby Chicago Sheraton Suites. I had booked a room from the night before, so it was available immediately. I dropped my bags, had a shower, and hit the gym. I worked out with weights for 30 minutes and ran on the treadmill for another 30, then went and had a second shower. I headed down to the restaurant for an American breakfast which I had sorely missed over the last 4 months. In between pancakes, eggs, bacon and sausage, all drenched in maple syrup, I drank 4 cups of coffee, then headed out to JP Morgan on Dearborn Avenue, where my 10:30 meeting was scheduled. I took the elevator to the 8th floor where the private bank suites were situated and walked through the foyer showing my ID card. From there I was escorted to one of the small conference rooms and asked to wait. So that's how they wanted to play it. There were 2 cameras covering the room from opposite corners, and I'm sure they were watching me. I dropped my leather laptop satchel on the table on caring for the polished wood, and went to stand by the window. I stood and looked out without moving. They left me there for over 17 minutes. I know because I got to 1020 Mississippi. During that entire time I didn't move an inch. I had learned some things from my many trips to the Far East and Southeast Asia. One of them was face. Show no fear and no weakness regardless of the odds. Joe Rutledge, the international stock and commodities traders vice president, walked in with Samuel Young, our corporate lawyer, following close behind. Had it been just Joe, the meeting would have been a brainstorm about fixing the problem and plugging the hemorrhage. If it had been Samuel alone, it would have been about covering the bank's peach in legalese. But it was both of them, so someone was about to be fired, and that someone was me. Adam. There was no handshake. He gestured to a seat and they chose to sit opposite me. The battle lines had been drawn. What the duck happened in Singapore? It wasn't really a question. We sent you there to bring some stability to the young guns, and instead you approved a 300 million United States dollars stock buy on a brand new company floated on the Singapore Stock Exchange, with no record of anything other than what they claim is a good idea. Yes. Yes, what? Yes, I did. His face went from ruddy to purple, and a vein popped out on his forehead. Would you care to elaborate? Look, Joe, it's all in my report. The CIA prospectus was top class. They dotted every I and crossed every T. The management team from top to bottom consists of experts in the field, with close to 200 years of experience between them. Then, the project itself has a projected 50-year lifespan, and the numbers were corroborated by Deloitte's and KPMG. I took in a breath. The oceans have been fished dry, and their aquaculture project is one of the most technologically sound anywhere on the globe, and backed by real-world know-how and capability. Then why is their stock price tanking? He shouted. They listed at $17 a share, and they're currently trading at $9.55. He punctuated the numbers with his finger on the table. And what did you do? You went and bought more. Yes, because there will be a rebound, and if it hits 25 as my team and I project, we will be in half at 17 and half at 9.55. That's a potential profit of 267 million. That's almost a 90% profit. He wasn't getting the whole picture. Joe, we own 25% of the total stock. We are the single biggest shareholder of a company that's tanking. He shouted, spit at me. That's because the Chinese, and to a lesser degree, the Thai and Vietnamese, are short selling to either sink the company, as it's in direct competition with their own fish industries, and threatens their near monopolies in Southeast Asia. Or so they can buy it for a song and extend their hold on the international fish trade. I punctuated the table back at him. We need the balls to write it out. This is a duck up of note. He shook his head. This is not the crazy 80s and 90s. We need to trade on certainties and maintain a positive risk ratio. It's all in my report. I pointed out again. Your report is nothing more than 50 pages of wishful thinking. He accused me. Anyway, it's no longer my decision alone. The board has sanctioned my recommendation and you're out. And with that, it was Samuel's turn to give me the lowdown. The offer was 3 months' salary and almost 30 days accrued leave, effectively giving me almost 5 months in salary. They would also cash in my share options, and pay out the difference between the issuing price and the current price. All in all, I would be walking away with close to $800,000, but with my reputation in tatters and zero prospects for future employment anywhere other than a McDonald's or KFC drive-thru. By 2 o'clock I had signed all the relevant forms, converted my 17-year 401k into an IRA, and surrendered all my company material including my laptop, and was escorted out. I stood on the pavement with an empty satchel over my shoulder, and a strange sensation in my head like I was having a brain aneurysm. I hurried to grab a cab to get back to the hotel with the vision of dying on the street, while strangers pointed and stared, vivid in my imagination. Once in my room I grabbed a whiskey mini from the bar and mixed it with 7-Up, and topped it with ice. Sacrilege. I know. I settled down to consider my options. I was 42. Too young to retire, but was I too old to start anew? Upon review there was only one option left, and it felt like a gamble, but then again, did I have the balls or not? I decided that if I didn't have the courage of my conviction, then how could I expect others to, and went shopping. Within the hour I was back with a brand new laptop with Windows 11 loaded and ready to play. I downloaded the programs I'd need to track my buying and selling and got busy. I plugged in a thumb drive with all my Singapore trades on it that I had carefully left in my hotel room, and away from my employer I was ready to roll. I checked up on our savings account and it was sitting at $50,000. My investment accounts were at $250,000, but required 24-hour notice. I did that, then I sold off some blue chip shares I owned and considered that with my salary and share option payout, I should hopefully have over $1,200,000. It would clear within the next 2 days, and I would transfer almost all of it to an offshore trading account called Blue Sky International. By the time I was finished it was after 9. I ordered a burger and a beer from room service and pulled out my phone. It had been off for over 36 hours. That was the longest ever. I considered powering it up, but I was mentally exhausted and incapable of dealing with whatever was awaiting me, so I dropped it, and instead, lay on the bed watching the news. I channel hopped to see how the world markets were performing, but there wasn't much about anything I wanted to know about. The stress of the day finally caught up with my jet lag, and I passed out. The next morning I went down to a very early breakfast as my internal clock was still off. I grabbed coffee and switched on my phone. It blew up with messages. Help Dad, Mom's having a meltdown. That was from Dean and Katie. It was longer than that, but that was it in essence. What's going on with Jean? From my father. Happy birthday and why aren't you answering your phone? From Jean's parents. Happy birthday Dad from Dean and Katie. Happy birthday and good luck Adam. From the Singapore team. Happy birthday son. From Dad. Happy birthday little brother. My sister Georgia. This was followed by more calls from Dean saying their mom was sad and crying, but it calmed down. There were no calls from Jean. No birthday wishes, no explanation as to why everyone thought she was acting strange. It was like I didn't exist. I caught the 8:30 flight into Springfield, Ubered home and walked into a hot mess. The kids had left their games, soda pop cans and plates all over the living room. The floors looked like our vacuum cleaner was broken. The kitchen was even worse with the sink filled with unwashed plates. The dishwasher was full. The dustbin was overflowing. I took my washing down to our laundry room where there was what looked like a couple of weeks of unwashed clothes. I separated the whites and lights from the darks and started the process. Back up and I began the cleanup from the living room to the kitchen. The formal lounge had 2 empty wine bottles and stemmed wine glasses. Both had signs of lipstick in different colors. Our bedroom looked like it hadn't had a change in some time. I put on clean sheets, changed the duvet cover and aired the room. The kids' rooms were actually cleaner. Messy but cleaner. As I was in cleanup mode I picked up, packed away and did all the rest. I vacuumed the floors and emptied dustbins. It took almost 3 hours before it looked like I had a handle on things and went to my study to power up my laptop. First thing I did was check out the Southeast Asia Aquaculture, CA. It had slipped to $9.37. That was almost 2 points down in a day. We see what kind of balls I had soon as my money cleared and I could get into the market. I called my dad. My mom had died 5 years earlier from breast cancer. We discussed Jean. He said that she had looked sad and depressed for the last 2 weeks. He said that she looked heartbroken, but without any obvious reason why. Strange. I checked on our banking transactions and there was nothing out of the ordinary. Stranger and stranger. I checked messages on our home phone, but nothing unexpected there either. I tumbled dried and folded clothes for a while, and then decided to go see what was available for supper. Short answer, not much. I went to the garage and reconnected the battery to my A6 Audi. I pressed the start button and it fired up the first time. I hit a local supermarket and I loaded up on basics, and also came back with the makings of a Thai green curry and jasmine rice. I was halfway through dinner preparations when Jean's car pulled up outside, and the kids came charging in with cries of "Dad's home," having noticed my car in the driveway. I hugged them both simultaneously and kissed them over and over. I told them how much I had missed them regardless of how much we Skyped. I had tears in my eyes and Katie was sobbing in my arms holding me tight, her whole body shaking. Dean was a little more in control as befitted his almost a man status. We stayed like that for a long while. When I looked up I saw Jean looking at us. At me. She had a strange almost wistful look in her eyes and a couple of tears rolled down her cheek. She waited for me to stand up with our children still holding on to me, and she moved in and kissed me gently on the lips. "Welcome home, Adam." There wasn't much enthusiasm in her words and her body language denoted a certain sadness or discomfort. Her eyes didn't hold mine for very long. That smells nice." She sniffed. "What is it?" "It's Thai green curry," I exclaimed. Dean and Katie looked at me unknowingly. "I don't know what that is, Dad, but it sure smells good." Dean smiled and hugged me again to nods and more kisses from Katie, who was holding me around the neck, her feet dangling off the ground. "You two go clean up and get ready for supper," directed Jean. "Hurry up now, you can have lots of time with your dad after." She came in and gave me a gentle hug and a kiss on the cheek. "You look wiped out, Adam." She ran a visual assessment of me. "How come you're back so soon? I thought you were there for another 8 weeks." "Turns out my bosses didn't like some of the initiatives I took. I confess. I've just been fired." She blanched. Then her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Well, that's she searched for a word. "Unfortunate." She managed to splutter. "We'll see." "How?" "Something will come up. But what about you?" I looked at this dear stranger in front of me. Married for 15 years and she was acting more like an acquaintance than my wife. "Are you okay?" I thought I saw her eyes go murky, but she blinked and straightened her shoulders. "It's work." She tried to smile but it didn't quite work. "Market's down." That's not what I'd heard. "There's changes at MRE. Everybody's under huge pressure." She waved her hands outwards to indicate how huge. Just then the kids washed up, came flying down the stairs and threw themselves at me once more. "We'll talk later." She turned to the kitchen. We gathered for the meal. I served and garnished each plate, then we sat down and had supper like a family for the first time in 4 months. I regaled the kids with stories about Singapore, the lifestyle and some of the activities I had participated in. Plates empty, Dean and Katie disappeared together and came back smiling holding out a wrapped present. "Happy birthday, Dad." Jean's hands flew to her mouth. I kissed my kids to the sounds of "Oh my God" from Jean. "I'm so sorry, Adam. I completely forgot." I was going to lash out and remind her that I got her gold and diamond earrings on her birthday, but concentrated on the kids instead. I opened my present. It was a box set of Band of Brothers. I loved that show and always said I wanted to own the DVD collection. I kissed them again. Their broad smiles matched mine at the pleasure of the giving and receiving. "I'll get you your present tomorrow, Adam." Jean was embarrassed and contrite. I waved it away. "No need," I said magnanimously. "Being home with my family is all the present I need." Dean and Katie threw themselves back into my arms with cries of "Love you, Dad." We sat around the table talking for an hour or more, but eventually they had to head off to do their homework, while Jean and I cleaned up the kitchen. "What's going on with you, Jean? You're not the person I know." She jerked her hand in a cutting motion as if to stop me from going further, then her shoulders slumped. I don't know, Adam. I'm depressed, I guess. You've always traveled so much and for weeks at a time. This last time was just too long." She looked up into my eyes. "You're not here. We hardly share a life." Tears trickled down her cheeks. "I feel lost." I reached over and pulled her into a bear hug. She resisted for a moment, then relented and let me hold her. I searched for her lips, but she turned her head and held it against my chest, circling my waist with her arms, and she sobbed softly. We stayed like that for a while, me wanting more, wanting to fix the problem, wanting to kiss and caress her. But she wasn't giving me the vibe that she wanted anything other than to be held. She had a point though. In the last 6 years since I had been promoted to management, I had found myself in the unenviable role of troubleshooter for young inexperienced teams. We had discussed it and had agreed that we would make the sacrifice with the end goal of both retiring when I turned 50 and enjoying a life of leisure and travel. She disengaged gently and suggested I go spend some time with the kids. I started with Katie, looked over her homework, then did the same with Dean. I put Katie to bed and kissed her goodnight, then went through to Dean. "Mom's not alright, Dad," he said with concern. "She's been crying and hardly doing anything around the house. She even forgot your birthday." He looked at the door making sure we weren't overheard. "I think she's having a nervous breakdown." There were tears in his eyes. "Please fix it, Dad." I nodded even though I had no idea what was going on or what to do about it. As I went downstairs I could hear her talking softly on the phone. She heard me or saw me and she switched off. Who was that? I raised an eyebrow. One of the girls from the office. She brought the conversation to a close. We looked at each other. She wasn't giving an inch. Whatever was bugging her, she wasn't about to discuss, but she looked like she was angry. Angry with me and trying to hide it. I decided that this was a far bigger problem, but was already feeling the jet lag kicking in again, and I still had so much to do. It was 9:30 when I went to my study and checked the Singapore Stock Exchange. They were 13 hours ahead and had been trading for 2 hours already. SIA was trading at $9.90. It had rallied somewhat. I went upstairs and waited for Jean to finish in the bathroom. Once we were both in bed, I reached for her and for a moment she stiffened then curled into me. "Please just hold me," she whispered in a small voice. I held her for a long time. This was not the woman I knew. Something was fundamentally wrong, but what? Had I been away too long? The separation too much to bear? But she had never said anything, not once. Had she fallen out of love with me? Fallen in love with someone else? Having an affair? Then, I had it terrible though. What if she was sick? What if it was a dreaded disease and she didn't know how to tell me? All these thoughts kept going round and round without resolution, but eventually the jet lag and all the high emotion of the last 2 days kicked in and I fell into a fitful sleep. I had dreams where I was chasing a nameless and unknown shadow without catching it. I woke up at 4:30 still feeling tired and woozy. I decided to go for a run and promised myself I'd buy some melatonin tablets from the pharmacy to help get my circadian rhythms back to Central Time. I was on the road for about an hour, and got back to find Jean gone with a short note asking me to give the kids breakfast and take them to school. It was still early so I went to check my bank account. The money from JP Morgan had cleared so I transferred it into my offshore account. I checked on the SIA shares, and they had not only lost their earlier gains, they were trading at $8.99 United States dollars. They were not exactly in free fall, but they were on the escalator going down. I was conflicted, fix my marriage or fix my financial future. Was it even possible to do both? I spent as much time as I could with Dean and Katie, and asked them some general questions about what they had been doing during the months I had been away. The answer was not much, except some company activities with Mom's boss Anthony Miller. They had played mini-golf and gone to movies and out for meals. Katie was oblivious, but Dean must have noticed my face and jumped in. It was always with his daughter, Evelyn, Dad. He defended. She always said that Mom was such a big part of the company, like we were all like one big happy family. Katie nodded her agreement. Yes, Aunt Evelyn always came with. She agreed. I gave them all a smile and told them that I was glad they didn't stay at home without enjoying life while I was away, but now I was back and summer was on its way. I wanted us to go on vacation and have the best one ever. They cheered and I got hugs and kisses all over again. I dropped them off at school and called a couple of friends to set up meetings for later that morning. I then phoned George Tallis, my old mentor. He was my manager when I first hit the trading floor, and he taught me much of the unseen currents that no computer programmer app will teach you. It's all driven by greed and fear, he would tell me over and over again. We spoke for a while. He still lived in Chicago and was a registered broker running a small company for a few old clients. We discussed my accreditation. I was SEC registered and a member of FINRA, and also registered with the Illinois State Securities Authority, and had signed the AML, anti-money laundering, compliance. We agreed that I'd send him an electronic copy of the SIA prospectus and discuss it later that day. I swung into HSHS Community Pharmacy, opposite St. John's Hospital. It was conveniently on my way to my first meeting of the day. I was walking out with my melatonin and some vitamin tablets when I spotted Jean and Evelyn Miller coming out of St. John's Hospital. They were holding on to each other and looked like two women tethered by a shared sorrow. I watched them unseen as they walked heads down and shoulders sloped, bereft of hope and dreams. They climbed into a waiting Uber and disappeared into the traffic. What the hell was that? I tried out all of the permutations running around my head from the previous evening, but nothing quite clicked. Was my wife sick and hadn't told me? Was Evelyn sick? They looked heartbroken and hanging on each other for support, but not sick. Neither looked sick. Was it a shared acquaintance? They looked too emotionally connected to the pain for it to be a simple acquaintance. A friend then? No, more than a friend. A lover. Yes, quite possibly a lover. But a shared lover. Whatever or whoever it was, they both shared a deep affection. Say it, my mind insisted. They shared a love for, what? For each other. Maybe, but that wasn't it. Duck. Now what? So I went rational and logical, or at least as rational and logical as I could under the circumstances, and made it to my meetings. I pitched the SIA share opportunity and left nothing out, including getting fired. Julian Knowles, my first appointment, said he'd get back to me later after he discussed it with his investment club. My second appointment was with Aaron Goldstein, an old-fashioned retailer with deep pockets. He liked the idea straight away, and after spending some time on his computer moving money around, he agreed to transfer $10 million to my trading account after the paperwork was completed. I was drinking coffee at Starbucks on Monroe when George called. He liked the prospectus and had a group of interested investors. We agreed to commission structure on a sliding scale, so that the higher the return, the higher the commission percentage. I called my dad next and discussed the SIA opportunity, and he said he'd like to jump onto it to the tune of $100,000. He would transfer money the following day. I then discussed the whole situation I found myself in with Gene. He stopped talking and I could mentally see him scratching his head. My dad was slow and methodical in his thinking. He had worked as a risk analyst for one of the state's larger insurance companies. When he did respond, it was concerning. Her behavior is reminiscent of a woman in mourning. Well, she wasn't mourning her mom or dad. They were both disgustingly healthy and living in Arizona. Apparently they loved the warm, dry climate. She had no siblings, and her few cousins were spread about the country and near strangers. We spoke longer as I interrogated his thinking, and eventually I had to agree with him. He rang off, but not before he said he'd send me the number of a private detective they had used regularly in the past to investigate insurance fraud. I went home and worked the phone to my contacts in Singapore and Southeast Asia to get an updated understanding of local sentiment and redeveloped a risk assessment profile on CA. It turned out virtually the same as my report. The numbers were rational, the management team was solid, the project was in its infancy, but the critical fact was that the management team had all sunk their own money into it, and that was the telling fact. They had more than skin in the game. They had staked their futures on its success. That cemented my position. It was green for go. I had a few hours to wait until the SSE opened, and I would start the trading. While I waited, I called the number of the private investigator. His name was Clarence Williams. I found his profile on LinkedIn and a small website under the company name, Discrete Solutions. There were no pictures of him. When I called, he spoke with a slow southern accent, and I got the feeling that he spoke that way on purpose, because his mind was like a steel trap and his questions sharp and insightful. He asked for a $5,000 advance, and said because my dad had sent so much business his way in the old days, he'd start the next day. With everything in place, I paced about drinking coffee waiting for time to pass. My nervous energy was peaking. Dean and Katie arrived home late after sports practice, and I spent as much time with them as I could, but I explained that I had a major deal on the go. Jean arrived looking tired but somewhat more purposeful than the previous night. I bought Chinese on the way home. She announced as she came through to my study and kissed me on the cheek. Are you working? Hi, Jean. No endearments from her, so none back from me either, like a childish tit for tat. I'd like us to eat as a family, but I have to be working later this evening from about 7. Okay, that's good, I guess. She was tentative. I have your birthday present. She handed over a small gift-wrapped package. The small card read, Happy birthday, Adam. Lots of love, Jean. I had sent more personalized cards to second cousins. Inside was a bottle of Hugo Boss aftershave. I thanked her and she leaned in to give me a dry kiss on the lips. I may as well have been a second cousin. We ate as a family. Dean and Katie shared their day between mouthfuls. Jean didn't talk much. We discussed some of the changes that had occurred while I was away. Dean complained that the old skateboard park had been closed down, and there was less and less for teenagers to do in town. Then Katie said that she thought it was a good thing that Mr. Miller, Mom's boss, was converting a property into a shelter for abused teenagers. I turned to Jean with a raised eyebrow. Yes, well, I may have mentioned it. She admitted. Tony wants to create a legacy project, and this is his way of doing it. She was very superficial with the details, and I could sense that there was more she wasn't saying. I'm surprised. I didn't realize that Miller was into that sort of thing. I really was. I thought he was the country club type. His wife Lynn started it while she was alive, and he continued after her death. She informed me somewhat smugly, or was it something else I couldn't quite recognize? He often used empty houses that he owns for this, but now he wants to convert one into a permanent facility. Why? Why not? She almost snapped at me. It's a great cause and one that's sorely needed. It's not like the city or the state are doing much. Many of these teens end up on the street, she was about to say, but stopped thanks to the young ears at the table. I looked pointedly at Dean and Katie, nodding my head towards the door at them, and they excused themselves to allow Jean and I an adult conversation. Why now? Is what I meant. I looked at her closely. There was something about this. Something she wasn't saying. Her face went slack and something passed behind her eyes. The opportunity has presented itself now. she said, nodding as if to reinforce the validity of her words. Ah, okay. It certainly sounds like a great idea. Springfield can certainly use one, I asserted, smiling at her. She smiled back as we both stood up to clear away the remnants of the meal. I did my best to keep a pleasant expression on my face and not frown or scowl. She had lied to me. Maybe not all of it was a lie, but there was a good reason as to why now, and it wasn't opportunity. Secondly, her body language was screaming that she knew much more, and it was somehow personal. I helped clean up, took out the garbage, and told her I was going to my study to work. I still had an hour before trading opened in Singapore, and I sat down and contemplated the situation. I considered my marriage, trying to stay rational and keep a lid on the deep-seated pain that was threatening to engulf me. I knew that if I gave into it now, I would be unable to do what must be done. And yet, I knew that holding it in abeyance would probably make it worse when it hit. I wondered how we had reached this point. In the past, Jean and I had been compatible in almost every way. We had agreed on where to live, how to spend our money, our vacations, when to have children and how many. We had a good sex life. Fair enough, the last few years were difficult with all my traveling and away time, but usually, we would be making plans before my return, and we would invariably have a mini honeymoon when I returned. Except this time. I had thought we were both on the same page, but clearly we weren't. It pissed me off. Singapore and Southeast Asia was brimming with women looking for non-Asian men. Some for the experience. Some because most foreigners held lucrative positions and could offer more than their local counterparts. Some flat out saw it as their ticket to the West. I was hit on daily. At the office. On the subway. At the open-air food markets, and especially at the many bars and clubs. Many of my co-workers dallied with the local women. Some even moved them into their apartments as de facto live-in maids with benefits. I personally found the practice disgusting and exploitative, but no one actually cared about what I thought. The only reason I was thinking about this was because of the 10 times a week every week that I had turned down a pass from a good-looking woman. I had done so because I was married. More than that, I was married to a woman I loved and whom I thought loved me back, but her behavior and recent actions left me wondering if that was still true. I cast my mind back to consider if there had been any warning signs leading up to this, but other than almost a complete break in communication over the last few weeks, there was nothing I could pinpoint. There was much to ponder, but for now I had to focus on the job at hand. When the Singapore market opened, it was trading at 8.49. I went in carefully and methodically. There were lots of sellers and very few buyers, and any single big purchase would create ripples. I had over 30 million to play with. My contacts and George's contacts had come through. They trusted our expertise. God help us all. My first purchase was for 5 million from an unknown entity. Then there was an avalanche of shares hitting the market, as worried investors hoped to unload and salvage what they could. I bet that it was my old crowd dumping stock at the insistence of head office. I kept buying in 5 million increments, waiting for the price to stabilize, but it was in free fall, and kept dropping despite the purchases I was making. Someone was short selling shares they didn't have, hoping to buy them back at the end of the day cheaper. The price continued its downward trend, as panicked investors tried to divest their shareholdings, hoping to get 25 or even 20 cents to the dollar. The price had bottomed at $5.61 when I made the final purchase of $15 million. Our $30 million had purchased us a little over 10% of the total listed shares. That meant we could appoint someone to the board, as we owned a significant share block, if we decided to hold on to the shares, rather than selling and realizing the profit. I called George, and we both had a whiskey over the phone. The final result was that our purchases had triggered some of the investors who were sitting on the sidelines to come in and buy at this bargain basement price. The net result was that by the time I logged off, the price had steadily climbed to $8.72. The short sellers were in trouble and they would lose money. I rubbed my eyes and looked at the time. It was almost 2 in the morning. I had a 5-minute cleanup and climbed quietly into my bed and passed out, my melatonin tablets forgotten in my car. Next morning I woke up late. Everybody was downstairs, Dean and Katie finishing breakfast. Jean was talking on the phone. I heard her say something about time being of the essence. She saw me and said goodbye to the person on the other side. Work. She gave an exaggerated shrug. She poured me a cup of coffee. You must have come to bed late. I nodded whilst taking a sip. Did your trading or whatever go well? I copied her and shrugged non-committedly. She had no idea that everything except our home was riding on CA early days. We'll have to wait and see. I deflected. Okay. She came by and kissed me on the cheek. You still look tired. I'll take the kids to school. With that, she was out the kitchen calling Dean and Katie as she went. Those two shouted bye and love you dad and were gone. I poured a second cup and went to my study. I checked the closing share price, and was gratified to see that it had enjoyed a late rally, as market sentiment had shifted and closed the day at $10.14. Those that held shares must have been gratified. Those who were short selling must have incurred a bloodbath. Good. It was time for the shares to stabilize and start trading at their potential away from the games played by hostile entities. I washed up and started sending emails and making calls. First business was to catch up with our investment crowd. That over, I started with the Miller real estate website. It was the usual vision and mission statement with testimonials from happy sellers and buyers. There was a section of their social responsibility program which was centered around them helping teenagers in distress. They called it New Horizons Home. They claimed that they supplied housing, meals, training, counseling and helping troubled teenagers find jobs, finish school, get off the streets, drugs, prostitution, etc. There wasn't much more to be found on their website, so I moved to Facebook. I chased down Anthony Miller on Facebook, and there were loads of images of his cars and vacations and the people he knew and hung out with. There was a recent group photo of a company event. The whole MRE team was there with Anthony in the middle, flanked by his daughter Evelyn on his left and Jean on his right. Two things stood out. He seemed to have lost a lot of weight and was looking considerably older, and if I was unkind, haggard. The second thing I noticed was that Jean was holding his arm and looking at him rather than the photographer. It didn't mean anything because one can read whatever one wants to in these moments in time like a Renoir painting, but still. I looked up Jean's Facebook pages, and there wasn't much, other than some old images and posts of the family including the two of us in what in my mind was becoming defined as better times. Not much more other than some good news stories about her work, school and sports events. It was so bland and generic as to be uninteresting. The last photo she had posted of the two of us together was over 2 years old. Onto Evelyn's Facebook, which had started featuring a significant number of pictures that included Jean over the last few years. Some pictures showed her with Jean and Anthony, but the photos did not show anything untoward other than the fact that they spent time together. Then the latest set of posts were somewhat cryptic about the meaning of life and praying to God and the universe for positive outcomes. I had another conversation with Clarence Williams. I told him that I wanted to fast-track the investigation. He said he'd try, but these things take as long as they take. Then I called my dad. His advice was to stop jumping onto unsubstantiated conclusions and homegrown theories, and to let the experts do their work, and finally to give it time. Easy enough for him to say. I was in a quandary. Should I reach out to my wife and start mending whatever was broken? If I did, would it simply lead to bigger heartache later if I learned that I'd been played for a fool? On the other hand, if I did nothing and it was fixable, how much would it hurt if I could have made a difference, but didn't? There was a hotshot lawyer's office in town and I made a call. I got through to a female associate whose advice was that it would be better if the marriage was fixable than going through a divorce. Very rarely are there winners, she said. Mostly there's only losers. I had one last card to play. One of Jean's male colleagues owed me a small favor after I had recommended some inexpensive but good quality shares. He had last worked at MRE about 6 or 7 months ago, but I thought I'd pump him for some info. He was working for a competing realty company, but was available for a late lunch, and we met up at Red Robin for burgers and a brew. Chad walked in wearing a company golf shirt, chinos and dockers, with a pair of sunglasses perched on his head. He couldn't have looked more like a realtor if he tried. After pleasantries and general chit-chat during our burgers, I got down to it. He laughed as my intentions became clear. So, you're on a fishing expedition, Adam? I nodded. Why? I'm trying to understand a bit about MRE. I limited my explanation. Some things have popped up that have me concerned. He got serious. Things changed once Tony lost his wife to cancer. It looked like he lost his drive for a long while. Then his daughter became the driving force, and over the next year or so he seemed to find himself again. He stopped and looked at me shrewdly. Your wife and he became quite close. She was sometimes referred to as his office wife. He stopped to judge the effect he was having on me, and I gestured to him to continue as my throat had tightened, and I was afraid that if I tried to speak, it would have come out like a rasp. I didn't see anything inappropriate as such, but you know how cruel office gossip can get. He scratched his head. One thing I can tell you is that Tony, Evelyn and your wife spent a lot of time together, but then again you were away so much, right? I shrugged helplessly. We spoke around the subject without adding any more. He was about to head out when he remembered something. You do know that the word is that Anthony may have been diagnosed with cancer, right? We said goodbye, but I stayed behind and called St. John's Hospital. I presumptuously asked what room Anthony Miller was in. Turns out that he was in a private room in the oncology ward. I paid for the lunch and headed home. I had a lot to think about. That evening went by in the same way as the previous 2 nights, except that after we had cleaned up I went outside with a whiskey and a shirt. I sipped and puffed for a while. The neighborhood was quiet. Jean came out with a glass of wine in her hand. "Can we talk, Adam?" "Go ahead." "You visited the MRE website," she accused me. It was obviously a little more advanced than I'd expected. I suppose if they captured visitors' data they could use that to make contact. And I want to know why. Why what? Why are you checking the company website? What do you expect to find? I suppose you also checked everybody's Facebook page. She looked intently at me, daring me to say the wrong thing, so she could pick a fight or start a confrontation. We've been married long enough for me to recognize the signs. What did you expect to find? Exactly what I found. I gave her my poker face. And what was that? Why are you interrogating me, Jean? I'm not interrogating you. It feels like you're snooping. Social media pages are hardly private spaces. I laughed at her and she blanched. Evelyn said you also access her Instagram, she accused. Did she? Yes, she took a deep breath and tried to center herself. Why are you acting like this? Like what? Like this, right now. Why do you think, Jean? I looked at her stone-faced and blue-shirted smoke in her direction, knowing how much she hated it. She waved her hand around, dissipating the smoke, and spilled some wine on her blouse. Please stop it, Adam, she started crying. Normally, I would have gathered her in my arms, but not this time. Why are you crying, Jean? I looked at her without emotion. You're upsetting me with your attitude, Adam. She wailed louder to make the point stick, but I just blew more shirred smoke, creating a small cloud. Who are you? I asked her. She tried to formulate an answer but was left voiceless for a while. She finally found her voice. I'm your wife, Adam Carter. That's who I am. She glared at me. I'm not so sure. I walked away as she gasped and ran inside. I finished my drink, killed the cheroot, then went to my study to work. Sia was rallying hard and had climbed to $11.92, and the trend looked set to continue. George and I had a call, and we both agreed that this was a trend and not a blip. I stayed online and continued to monitor activity throughout the market. With the exception of blue-chip shares that were on a gentle upward trend, the rest of the market was volatile, but within the expected limits. Sia was the only share showing a significant upward movement, but was, however, still a long way from its listing price. It looked like we were experiencing some profit-taking from those who had bought low. I sent a message to one of my JP Morgan team members, and he admitted that they had managed to dump about half the stock for about 50 cents to the dollar, but had been instructed by my old boss, Joe Rutledge, to hold back on the rest and wait as the trend was looking positive, and perhaps they could break even in the end. We both snickered for a while. He said by the end JP Morgan might want to rehire me and fire Rutledge. That night I grabbed a spare duvet and slept on my sofa's pull-out bed in my study. Next morning I again checked closing prices on SGX, and was pleasantly surprised to see that Sia had closed on $13 and some cents. The trend had continued as predicted, and our investment crowd had doubled their money. Now if we could get to the $25 we had projected, we would make more than 300% profit. I made breakfast and called the kids down to eat while I drank coffee. I ignored Jean completely throughout the morning, then took the kids to school. After I dropped them off, I hit the gym and went to AITA for a very late breakfast. I made calls, and eventually went home and had a 2-hour Teams meeting with George. We spoke about creating a combined brokerage with offices in Springfield and Chicago. We threw that about and agreed that he'd start working on the structure and shareholding of the new business, while I would develop a go-to-market plan. I was busy developing the document late into the afternoon when I heard Jean arrive. She was alone. I've dropped Katie and Dean with the Beckers for the night, she informed me. We need to talk. She invited me through to the living room. She had poured me a bourbon on ice and herself a glass of wine. I sat down and waited for her to start. Generally the first one to talk loses, so I sat in silence sipping my drinks until she became agitated and off she went. I don't know what you think I've been doing while you were away, Adam. I haven't thought anything yet. Well, you're acting very disrespectfully and ugly towards me. The woman was right in that. Is that how you feel? I raised an eyebrow. Disrespected. She started to nod, then realized the hypocrisy and started with the waterworks. I'm sorry, Adam. You're never at home anymore. We're like two strangers. She sniffed with some satisfaction at her succinct description. So after 17 years, we're strangers because I was gone for 4 months. All the Skyping, all the messages, all the phone calls, counted for nothing. I've been under huge pressure and you've been away. She wiped tears from her eyes. But, you're my husband and I'm your wife and that's all that matters. She glared, daring me to gainsay her. She got up and excused herself. I sat sipping my bourbon wondering if the woman was demented. I heard her phone ring and I heard her talking without making out the words. Soon all I could hear was the bath running. It took some time before she came down. She was wearing a soft, knitted gray dress that ended a hand above her knees with a pair of black pumps and a single strand of pearls that I had bought her in the Far East some years back. I must admit that for a 39-year-old mother of two she looked delectable. In fact, she looked hotter than most 30-year-olds. "Go shower and get dressed," she urged me. "I'll book a table at Chesapeake Seafood Restaurant." I was done and ready in 15. I got dressed with the impression that she was talking to someone on the phone again. I ignored my instinct to have it out with her and bit my tongue instead. We Ubered to the venue where she started with a gin and tonic in the lounge. I purposely one-upped her by ordering a Singapore gin sling. Later, when we were seated in the dining room, she ordered the mussel hot pot, and I ordered half a dozen oysters and a half shell for starters. We drank Chardonnay and spoke about the children. She didn't seem all that concerned about me losing my job. "You're one of the smartest men I know, Adam. I trust you'll find a job in no time." She smiled at me. Clearly she had no idea that I was now a corporate pariah. "In any case, our savings will get us through till you get sorted." I almost snorted with mirth and worry. She had no idea that right now our entire future was riding on my stubborn refusal to accept that I was wrong about CA. Yet the evening got better, not worse, as we discussed friends, parents and mundane day-to-day topics that are the backbone of any marriage. She asked about some of my former colleagues that she had met at company get-togethers. I steered clear of any MRE conversation until I had some intel. Then it was time for mains. I had the captain's platter and she had the lobster. She plied me with wine, and I drank it wondering if her intention was to get me drunk. Because if it was, she was succeeding. The evening progressed easily as we warmed to each other. I must say that if she was having an affair or cheating with someone, she was doing a fine job of showing me how much she missed me. She caressed my hand, looked me in the eyes, and was 100% attentive. We finished the meal, but instead of going home, she suggested the gin mill to try some of the artisanal gins on offer. We taxied and squeezed into a very crowded cocktail bar. We managed to grab a bartender's attention and ordered Negronis. We sipped our bitter cocktails pressed against each other, with Jean's arm curled around my waist. She reached up to my mouth and kissed me firmly, running her tongue across my lips. "I'm not wearing any panties," she whispered, grabbing my hand and sliding it between her thighs. I paid our bill by dumping cash at Alessandro, our barman, and we were off with Jean dragging me out as fast as she could. It was early enough to find lots of taxis, and we grabbed the first one and headed home. On the way there, she put me into an unrelenting lip lock as she alternately tried to suck my tongue clean out my mouth and tried to push hers down my throat. Seen or unseen by our taxi driver, she had my fly open and her hand inside my pants, slowly jerking me off with enough intent to keep me rock hard, but not enough to make me come. We crashed through the front door, and I kicked it closed behind me as I pulled off her dress, leaving her in her bra and jewelry. After an exhausting bout of sex, we sounded like we had run flat out around the track, and it took a long time before we were able to draw a normal breath. I half lifted, half carried her upstairs to the shower, and we both got in. I washed her down slowly and thoroughly, and she managed to pull herself together long enough to do the same for me. We dried off and fell into bed. She kissed me on the lips and curled into me, pulling my arm around her and placing it across her right breast and cupping the left. She was asleep in an instant, and her slow, steady rhythm lulled me to sleep as well. I woke up to the smell of coffee and bacon. I pulled on a pair of sweatpants and went down. She was making bacon and eggs with English muffins in the toaster, with apple juice on the table and coffee percolating. She saw me and came over to kiss me. "What was that last night?" she asked, smiling. "You ducked the living daylights out of me." "Well, that's what you get when I haven't had sex for 4 months. I kissed her back. "I should ration you more often." She giggled. "I don't know how I managed to walk to the kitchen this morning. My poor Peach and Kitty are going to be throbbing the whole weekend." She reached over and kissed me again. "And I love it." "You're welcome." I laughed while pouring coffee. We had breakfast together and she told me of things that needed doing around the house and the backyard. After that, she got dressed and went to pick up Dean and Katie. I was in the backyard getting ready to start a bit of a cleanup from winter when I noticed my phone ringing. I was singing along to the radio when I answered. It was Clarence Williams. "Can you talk?" he asked, and my life turned to crap. That's it for part 1, friends. Stay tuned for part 2 tomorrow. Make sure to subscribe and tap that notification bell so you don't miss the exciting conclusion to Adam's story.